It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The Prime Minister rolls back on the government's net zero policy, saying British people are being told to sacrifice more than others.
We'll now have a more pragmatic, proportionate and realistic approach that eases the burdens on families.
It was an unrealistic target and it sounds great, but it's impractical.
Doesn't surprise me, and I feel like it's definitely done as a vote winner.
The electric car industry leads the criticism and calls on the government to show ambition and commitment. We look at what it means for the 2050 net zero target. Also tonight, a Met police officer is charged with murder after the fatal shooting of Chris Kaba in South London last year. As Russia's foreign minister and Ukraine's president clash at the UN in New York, we have a special report on the clinic in the United States treating Ukrainian amputees. And the King pays homage to the planet after arriving in France for the start of a 3-day state visit. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. This is a new approach to one of the biggest challenges we face, climate change. That was the message from the Prime Minister today as he revealed a rollback on the government's net zero policy. Rishi Sunak said that the previous Green policy had meant unacceptable costs for hard-pressed British families, perhaps a swipe at his predecessor, Boris Johnson. But he insisted he was still committed to achieving net zero by 2050. Labour admitted today it would reverse the decision on delaying the ban on petrol and diesel cars, which was the part of the announcement that angered some of the car manufacturing industry. We'll get more on that reaction soon, as well as how the changes are going to affect all of us. But first, let's take a closer look at some of what we heard from the Prime Minister today. Well, here's what Rishi Sunak announced. The plan to phase out all new oil and gas boilers by 2035 will be watered down, and people will be given more time to make the transition to heat pumps. And there is a new exemption. The boiler upgrade scheme will increase by 50% to £7,500. The date for cars to have an electric engine has been pushed back from 2030 to 2035, but you will be able to buy fuel second-hand cars after 2035. And the plan for privately rented homes to have an energy efficiency rating of C or better by 2028 has been abandoned. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, reports.
Rishi Sunak back when he liked showing off his green credentials. Ambitious net zero targets have been at the heart of the Tory agenda for years. Now, as PM, announcing a retreat.
The test should be, do we have the fairest credible path to reach net zero by 2050 in a way that brings people with us? Since I've become Prime Minister, I've examined our plans, and I don't think they meet that test.
The ban on petrol and diesel cars delayed. Phasing out gas boilers watered down. He insisted this is just a new path towards the same goal.
This country is proud to be a world leader in reaching net zero by 2050. But we simply won't achieve it unless we change. We'll now have a more pragmatic, proportionate and realistic approach that eases the burdens on families.
The Prime Minister adamant that nothing has changed.
I think it is absolutely wrong to describe in any way, shape or form what I am doing today as watering down our targets. Our targets remain.
Rishi Sunak saying he's taking decisions in the national interest, not for political reasons. But the promise he made a year ago when he entered number 10 was to lower the political temperature, to restore calm. Yet, as a result of today's gamble, he has industry bosses denouncing him and blue-on-blue anger as Tory MPs worry about another U-turn.
Some Tories delighted by today's announcement, but this, again, is a divided party.
The Prime Minister is well aware that there's a strong section of Conservative MPs who believe that this is absolutely vital for our country, but also for our party. There is huge political downside, I think, if we become seen as a party which is sceptical about the need to decarbonise our economy and the opportunity that it represents.
Rishi Sunak's attacks on short-term thinking are aimed squarely at one man. These were once Boris Johnson's targets. Today, he warned the PM not to lose ambition. For once, Labour agree with him. They would reinstate the pledge to ban new petrol cars by 2030.
We would keep that at 2030 because that's what business has been investing for. That's what business expects. That's how we can meet net zero. But it's also how we can lower the fuel costs for households who have cars.
As the Prime Minister spoke, in New York, world leaders are gathering for the UN Climate Summit, unimpressed with what they've heard.
Well, I think it's unfortunate that he would do that. And I think the people of the United Kingdom largely agree that it's the wrong decision.
Do you have a message for the Prime Minister, sir?
That's for people of the United Kingdom to address, and I certainly disagree with him.
Is it going to set back the course?
Well,
a climate consensus in place for many years, today shattered. This, the go-ahead for net zero differences to be at the heart of the election. Sam Coates, Sky News.
So the government's plan, it says, is to protect hard-pressed households. And there is no doubt the cost of living crisis is putting strain on families. So do people agree with the Prime Minister? Sky's People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has been to Morley and Outwood, the constituency of Conservative MP Andrea Jenkins, who last night told Sky News the people there don't buy into net zero policies.
So this is my combination boiler.
Gordon is into his green technology like solar power, but he says he's not ready to give up his gas boiler just yet. He also happens to have been a plumber for 25 years.
These are the go-to boiler for millions of people, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the government's plan was to phase these out. What was the problem with that and the timescale, do you think?
I think that the problem that they've always had is that it was an unrealistic target, and it sounds great, but it's impractical.
Getting the UK to net zero will require huge changes to how we all live. The Prime Minister says households who'll struggle to make the switch will be exempt from replacing boilers for heat pumps. That's a crucial sweetener for a fifth of households who, with this change, won't need expensive upgrades. Ultimately, international agreements on climate change were always perhaps going to be balanced with the needs of real people and what they can actually afford. The Prime Minister now calculating that going too fast could serve to alienate struggling voters in constituencies like this one. There are now more than 800,000 electric cars in Britain. Sales have boomed since the government committed to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. It looks like motorists will now have another 5 years to hit that expensive target.
Personally, I believe it does need to be pushed further into the future, so the government have got time to put the infrastructure into place, because there isn't enough fast chargers when people are out on the road on a daily basis.
This sort of policy doesn't surprise me, and I feel like it's definitely done as a vote winner rather than done with good conscience, and it's quite symptomatic of constantly changing cabinet and changing prime ministers.
This surprise announcement by the government is certainly a major policy U-turn, but in the eyes of voters, it could recharge the government's flagging popularity. Nick Martin, Sky News, Leeds.
The car industry has been rolling out electric cars, with many manufacturers selling an EV range. And today they expressed their anger at the changes, warning that it could mean a slowdown in investment. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso has been looking at what it really means for our net zero commitments.
Until now, Britain has been leading the race to electrify. Car companies spending billions of pounds, including government subsidies, gearing up for the 2030 ban on new petrol and diesel cars.
But a sustainable future is going to take some work.
Pushing the finishing line back 5 years has infuriated automotive giants like Ford, who say it will undermine the industry.
question is making sure the market moves with you, because we can develop the products, but unless the demand is there, and any mixed messages can potentially cause consumers to say, oh, wait a bit, that's not good for the industry, not good for the exchequer, and not good for the environment.
It's not just the car makers who are fuming. Charging infrastructure is crucial to persuading consumers to go electric. Industry leaders fear the delay will make their job harder.
If you talk to a local authority, they will say, I've got this 2030 target, I know I need to do something by 2030, which means they're building out their plans now. Now they've got more time, so everything just gets stretched. The problem hasn't gone away. Our climate is still in the crisis that it is today.
This is the largest charging hub in the UK, opened by the Chancellor just a fortnight ago in what now looks like a mixed political message. The car industry's angry because they think this delay will damage consumer demand for exactly the sort of electric vehicles the government's been telling them they have to make for years. But there's a wider problem too. Changing a flagship industrial policy so suddenly and so late risks damaging the UK's credibility with the investors who are going to provide the billions of pounds without which net zero won't happen. Yes. Rishi Sunak did announce increased grants for heat pumps to replace gas boilers, but scrapped targets for their removal, coming after the failure of the latest offshore wind power auction. Climate watchdogs are concerned net zero is at risk.
We released our progress report in June, and in that progress report, we explicitly said the country was off track to deliver on its legally binding targets, and I think the announcement today, we think, has certainly made that more challenging to do. The net zero reset has triggered a massive business backlash, with companies including Coca-Cola and Nestle calling it an historic mistake that will damage the economy, jobs and Britain's reputation. The price for slamming on the brakes could be high. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Birmingham.
Let's speak now to our political editor, Beth Rigby. And Beth, anger there from the car manufacturers we saw, and some differing opinions from voters and MPs. But what's the feeling coming from Westminster tonight?
Well, Jim, you can see it's quite stormy Downing Street here this evening. Now, the Prime Minister in that speech insisted it was not about politics, but that was an intervention by Rishi Sunak that was all about politics. I think it's fair to say that that was the moment where he fired the starting gun on a long campaign for a general election. And this is a Prime Minister well behind in the polls that's trying to find dividing lines, if you like, with Labour. And if you want to know how political it was, no sooner had he departed the stage and given the speech than campaign Conservative headquarters issued a note listing all the questions for Labour when it comes to net zero. What are the Tories trying to do? Well, I think we can look at Uxbridge, what happened there on ULEZ and charging drivers of older diesel cars, how divisive that was and how it won them that by-election in Uxbridge. And now they sent an opportunity. Now, if you talk to people in Downing Street, they will say this is all about the Prime Minister still committed to the big picture, but trying to help hard-working families by delaying some of the costs for net zero. But I think there's no doubt, too, that this is a Prime Minister that's also talking to the base of the Conservative Party, people that perhaps supported Liz Truss, who likes all of these policies, perhaps trying to win back some lapsed Conservative voters from 2019 that might be looking to the Reform Party to the right. He's trying to pick them back to close the gap. On Labour, well, what's Labour's response? I think they're largely trying to ignore it. From a Labour perspective, this is an election that they want to fight on issues of economy, of NHS, and also going in on immigration, given that that's such a big issue for voters. Rishi Sunak wants to make green policies and wedge issues and dividing lines over environmental policies part of his campaign. And as one senior Labour strategist said to me this week, it's going to be a fight. They're in the last round of this boxing match between the two parties. the Conservatives are losing and losing badly, and they're going to throw out some wild punches. The challenge for Labour is to not get thrown off course, to not let those punches hit them, and to not let it derail them from their game plan when it comes to this election. But I think what we can see today is not only is it stormy here, but this is going to be a bruising and brutal fight.
OK, Beth, thank you. Well, as the net zero discussion continues, the price of fuel is soaring, but perhaps some light with a surprise drop in the level of inflation today. But prices are still rising. Attention now turns to tomorrow as the Bank of England prepares to reveal its latest interest rate decision. Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway.
In the real economy, where oil, gas and fuel are still all important, the shadow of energy prices still looms large, especially in the haulage business.
In the last 3 months, we've seen a huge increase in the region of 17.5%, which in real terms puts our bill up about £500,000 a year, which is obviously somewhere around £10,000 a week.
The rate of inflation's now coming down, but prices are still rising.
I know we had good news this morning with the inflation, but figures being lower than expected. But I don't think the fuel price increases have sort of got filtered into that yet, which they certainly will during September.
Still, there is now a glimmer of hope in the data, for not only did inflation fall to 6.7% in August, it's falling faster than expected. You get a sense of that from this chart. The bars show you how much above or below economists' expectations inflation actually came in. For most of recent history, inflation was higher than expected. Those bars were in the red territory. But now look at August, that bar on the far right. It was further below expectations than at any point in the cost of living crisis.
So what does it mean in practice? Well, for one thing, that target set by the Prime Minister and Chancellor of halving inflation by the end of the year looks a bit more likely. On the other side of town, the Bank of England may be less likely to raise interest rates, so most economists think they still will do. But it's worth just taking a step back here. Why is inflation falling? In part, it's because people have less money to spend. That is a recessionary signal.
And that signal is coming across here in the hospitality sector.
I would say people are careful with money now. They know that they're under pressure, and there's a semi-recessionary mentality without a full recession. So they are going out a bit less, spending a bit less when they're out.
In short, probably a bit too early to be popping champagne corks. But with inflation now falling faster than expected, perhaps a little glass of Prosecco.
Cheers.
Ed Conway, Sky News.
A Metropolitan Police officer will appear in court tomorrow charged with murder following the fatal shooting of Chris Kaba in South London last year. The 24-year-old father-to-be was killed by a single bullet fired through a car windscreen. Shingi Marike has this report.
It's been more than a year since the death of Chris Kaba, and now a murder charge. On the 5th of September 2022, the 24-year-old was driving through South London, followed by an unmarked police car with no lights or sirens. After turning into a street in Streatham Hill, there was contact between his car and a marked police vehicle. An officer fired one shot through the windscreen, hitting Mr. Caba in the head. He was unarmed. It later emerged the car Mr. Caba was driving did not belong to him and had been linked to a firearms incident the day before. His parents say they welcome the charging decision and have mourned not only privately, but in public too. This was them speaking to Sky News earlier this year, 6 months after his death.
Every day is painful for us, very painful for me. I stand every day, but it's not easy.
The death of Chris Kaba was followed by an investigation by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. They then passed the file to the Crown Prosecution Service in March, followed by today's charging decision. The officer involved in the case is not being named for legal reasons. That officer remains suspended from duty, while any misconduct proceedings will be considered by the Met at the end of the legal process. In a statement, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Helen Millichap said, "We have fully supported the IOPC investigation as it has worked to establish the facts. We must now allow the court process to run its course, so it would not be appropriate for me to say more at this stage." The officer will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on Thursday. Shingi Marike, Sky News, New Scotland Yard.
The chief executive of Barking, Havering and Redbridge University Hospitals Trust has told Sky News that the strikes are making it feel like they're walking into the winter battle with one hand tied behind their back. Consultants and junior doctors held their first ever joint strike today, reducing staffing levels to the bare minimum seen on Christmas Day and other holidays. Sky's health correspondent Ashish Joshua reports.
This was the day health leaders were dreading. Junior doctors and consultants striking together and leaving hospital wards with only the barest of minimum cover. Sky News has been given rare access to a busy East London hospital as its chief executive tries to minimise the impact of this unprecedented industrial action.
I think we've cancelled more than 10,000 outpatients appointments here. We've cancelled more than 1,000 non-urgent surgeries and a small number of urgent surgeries as well. And what we're increasingly seeing is actually we're not cancelling things because we're not even booking stuff in anymore for the strike dates.
How can you manage a hospital like this?
It's making it very hard to plan for what's going to be the toughest period of the year in the NHS. It feels like we're walking into a really tough battle with one hand tied behind our back.
A YouGov poll commissioned for Sky News has found that the public is more than twice as likely to blame the government for the ongoing strikes than the doctors' trade union, by 45% compared to 21%. Both the government and NHS England blame the industrial action by consultants and junior doctors for the record number of patients waiting for elective care, now at almost 7.7 million. Almost 900,000 appointments have been cancelled since health workers' strikes began in December last year.
We're extremely sorry and we understand how difficult it must be, but this is happening day in, day out within the National Health Service already. The waiting lists were completely skyrocketing. It's really disingenuous to try and blame waiting lists on doctors' strikes because it's only been a tiny increase since we started industrial action.
The winter pressure doesn't just affect larger acute hospitals. Community hospitals like this one in Surrey are also trying to prepare for another difficult season.
Our walk-in centres, we have seen and are expecting to see an increased number of patients needing to access care via the walk-in centre. We would urge people to ensure that they're using the right service for their needs.
The pressure is beginning to tell across every part of the health system. And that will only intensify with every further strike day into winter. Ashish Joshua, Sky News, in Ilford.
The Ukrainian president and Russian foreign minister both attended the UN General Assembly in New York today, being sure to avoid each other in person, though. President Zelensky took his moment on stage to criticise the Russian invasion and call for Moscow to lose its UN veto power. His address was ahead of a visit to meet medics and Ukrainian amputees in the US tomorrow. Charities estimate that more than 25,000 Ukrainians have lost at least one limb in the war. That's an average of 45 people each day. Our US correspondent Mark Stone was invited inside a treatment centre in Maryland and sent this report. A warning that his report does contain images and descriptions of patients who've lost limbs.
His name is Gosha, and he's one of a staggering number of Ukraine's new army of amputees. He's been in America for just a few days to be treated here in Maryland for free. Today, the first step in making him feel more complete once again.
This is the power button here. It's a кнопка включения.
It's like Terminator. The staff here have spent 2 decades treating American soldiers maimed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Gosha is the 39th Ukrainian soldier to be helped here. He's among a fortunate fraction from an extraordinary number to have lost limbs in this war.
The number isn't official, but there's been pretty accurate information that it's north of 25,000 injuries, and some of them are multiple limb loss, as you've seen. That's a stadium full of amputees.
In conversation with Gosha, a picture of his battle, one which has defined the war, the siege at the Azovstal steelworks 16 months ago.
The mortar shelling began, and I got fragments in my shoulder. It severed the artery. It was a lot of blood. Vasyan started applying the tourniquet. We removed my body armor. I passed out several times. I asked Vasyan, finish me off.
And listen to this, reflections of the bunker where he lived and where he was treated.
There was a corridor, a small one. And I mean, they're cutting someone's arm, and you're watching it. Everybody is watching it. On the floor, there was a bag with arms, legs. That's how it was.
As for his friend Vasyan, who wouldn't finish him off, well, he is held by the Russians now, fate unknown, and with their dog.
This guy never leaves my head. He's my sworn brother. He had a dog, her name was Sofa, a pit bull. It was cold in the bunker. We made beds for ourselves, and we put the dog between us in the middle, and we slept like that, hugging, so the dog could get some warmth. We were always together with Vasyan, and I promised him, I said, when we return back home, when I baptize my son, you will be the godfather. And my son is 5 years old now. He has not been baptized yet. I'm waiting for Vasyan to return because I promised to make him godfather.
Yeah, nice.
Gosha will be here for several more weeks and then months of recovery.
Yes.
Back with his wife and children in Ukraine.
No.
Mark Stone, Sky News in Maryland.
The King and Queen have attended a special banquet at the Palace of Versailles tonight, hosted by the French President Emmanuel Macron and joined by some special celebrity guests. 6 months after their trip was postponed because of huge protests in the country, the royals have started a 3-day state visit to France. Sky's royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports from there.
6 months later than planned, this was a bonjour with bells on. A cinematic setting to welcome the King and Queen. And at the Arc de Triomphe, Paris pulled out all the stops. With ceremony, display, and a pause to remember. This is the rekindling of an historic relationship. The City of Light turned up to show support. But beyond the stands, curious crowds were kept well back.
France loved the late Queen.
Yeah.
Does France love the King, the new King? For me, yes, because I guess he has a new vision of the monarchy and he's very modern at some point, and I guess he's going to bring a new vision.
This state visit, it could be a new start, I think, between the new king and the French president re-elect last year.
State visits are always diplomatic deployments, and this is pomp with a purpose.
We're told this visit is a celebration of Anglo-French relations, but behind the bonhomie is a much bigger goal. This is a chance to rebuild bridges after the turbulence of Brexit.
With King and President side by side, the monarch's soft power hard at work. And later, more theatrics with a state banquet at Versailles, once home to French royalty, now hosting a glitzy guest list. The King toasted in English and French. And on the day his Prime Minister reduced his green commitments, the King reinforced his.
En protégeant notre précieuse planète.
By protecting our precious planet and by fostering security, opportunity and hope, we will continue to grow together, strong, vital, prosperous.
Fort, dynamique et prospère.
Subtle but significant words as the King looks to foster friendships and strengthen ties with our closest neighbour. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Paris.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin McGuire, and the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine. Now, amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this story on the front of the Financial Times. Their headline, Sunak sparks business backlash after U-turn on net zero pledges. It's not there, but it will be when we come back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Prime Minister has announced a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars will be pushed back by 5 years as part of a major rollback on net zero policy. The UK's rate of inflation unexpectedly fell to 6.7% in August. Some analysts say it means another interest rate hike tomorrow is now less certain. The family of Chris Kaba has welcomed a decision to charge a Metropolitan Police officer with murder following the 24-year-old's fatal shooting in South London last September. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin McGuire, and the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the government's rollback on its net zero policy is on the front of Tomorrow's Eye. The headline, Sunak's net zero election gamble. The Financial Times says the Prime Minister is facing a business backlash after his U-turn. The Guardian calls it a green bonfire and says Rishi Sunak's move to close the poll gap with Labour has been condemned by some. The Sun claims a victory for its campaign and supports the delay in hitting net zero targets. The Express describes the Prime Minister as honest over the UK's net zero commitments. The Mail says Rishi Sunak's move, which it calls bold, could transform Tory fortunes. Elsewhere, with word that one of James Bulger's murderers, John Venables, could be granted parole, the Metro proclaims, free him and he'll kill a child again. The Mirror reports that some military veterans involved in nuclear testing will take the government to court in a fight to make public records taken during atomic weapons tests. And finally, The Star says froth on beer makes pints taste twice as good. You can hear them giggling, can't you? Yes, absolutely.
I wouldn't mind a pint.
Later. Reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And as you can hear, we're joined tonight by Kevin McGuire and Sarah Vine. Thanks for coming in, both of you. Good to see you in the flesh in the studio. Let's start with The Guardian. I did hear you sniggering as I was going through the papers there, Kevin. Green bonfires, PM rose back on net zero targets.
Yeah, there's nothing like a panicky press conference by a Prime Minister after
Was it panicky?
Yeah, because he was going to make the speech on Friday. They had to bring it forward because of the leak last night. He wanted some clarity, but there we are. He had to even have a virtual cabinet meeting, get all these ministers on Zoom. Anyway, and he's also, look, that long-term decisions for a brighter future, that's going to be the slogan for the Tory party conference. Now, how can he put that up?
Well, it's very nice of the Guardian to put it on the front page.
But how can he put it up in Downing Street? Isn't that a bit grubby and breaking the rules? Anyway, he's certainly performed a U-turn, but how big is the U-turn? Because the 2030 ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, and they're going to be 2035. Well, until 2035, you could have bought a hybrid car, so petrol and diesel, as long as it had, like a Prius, although models are available, as long as you had some form of electrical power. It will have an impact. But a lot of the other things he said he was U-turning on, he'd made up. Who was bringing in a meat tax? There wasn't a one proposal, 7 containers for your recycling.
I was confused about the thing where you had to share a car
He's
with
invented.
People in your vehicle,
yes.
Yeah, but he was invented.
I didn't know those things were going to happen.
Doesn't he know his party's in power? He's the Prime Minister, little Rishi.
I think that you're being a bit disingenuous. I think you are. I think that...
What, more than usual?
But, I mean, he had to do this because a lot of this stuff was leaked to the BBC, wasn't it? So, you know, he had to do the conference today. But actually, I think this is the first time we've seen Rishi really take control of the agenda, I think, because I feel like until now he's almost been sort of fixing other people's messes and just sort of chasing his tail to try and catch up. This feels like this is something that he's doing, he wants to do. He's got quite a clear vision, and he's also parking his tanks on Labour's "We're the party of the working people" lawn, as it were, because obviously these, the main criticism of all of these measures is that they're happening too fast and that people can't afford them because, you've got to replace your boiler, it's £10,000. What he's just done, he hasn't really shelved anything. He's just stretched the timeline a little bit to allow people a bit more time. By 2035, they will probably be quite a decent second-hand market in electric cars. It will be cheaper and easier for people to get hold of them.
There's one now, actually.
It's coming. So I think it's quite a wise and clever idea, and I think that he is now finally feels like we're getting a bit of what Rishi wants. What's interesting about this from a sort of political geek point of view is, of course, it's the absolute opposite of what Boris Johnson wants. So again, there's that sort of internal
I think he's
Tory
misjudged the public
tension.
mood, actually. There was a poll for, it was Channel 4, another station, which showed 3 times as many people were less likely to vote Conservative because of this than were more likely to vote because of this. I think if he's got this idea, everyone up north who's working class is, dragging their knuckles and doesn't want the planet saved and cleaner energy, cleaner cars. I think he's wrong.
Is there any merit, though, in the argument that British people are suffering more in terms of green aspirations and therefore slowing it down gives them a chance to catch up and it doesn't hit people's pockets so hard so soon?
How are we suffering now?
The cost of living is,
but where we've suffered...
To replace the boiler is £10,000, a lot of money.
But you don't have to replace it unless your boiler's knackered, and you could have had a new gas one for years to come, and then it would work for another 10 or 20 years. This idea, he's almost created the impression that you'd get to, say, 2030, and your car, if it was petrol or diesel, was going to be impounded and squeezed in a compressor into a little metal block. Look, people are being hurt because since 2015 there's been an effective ban on onshore wind turbines. I think there's only been 20 have been getting planning approval when that is cheap electricity. It's the cheapest electricity. So going green and growth, as Boris Johnson actually go hand in hand. And it's better in the long run. It's rather like people get electric
Boris
cars.
Johnson was right, Kevin?
Well, look, stop clock is right twice a day. I think on this, he agreed with wiser people. And look, in electric cars, people who get them, all of a sudden, you're not spending a fortune filling it up with diesel or petrol.
Yes, but your journeys are staggered because you've got to recharge and you can't go very far. But anyway, on that point...
If you've got a range of 250 miles...
It depends on the electric car
people drive 250
depends on the electric car you get.
Mining lithium, which is what you need for the batteries, is very bad for the environment.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt.
Very bad.
Well, the other point of an electric car...
We don't do it. We make other people do it for us.
An electric car, you take out the internal combustion engine, so you're not burning a fossil fuel, but most of the electricity generated in the UK is coming from fossil fuels, gas and petrol. So you're basically just shifting the emissions to a big power station.
Let's take a look at the eye, and they've very helpfully coloured Rishi Sunak
in green.
Look
like Shrek,
so we know what we're talking
I think
about.
he's a bit more of a donkey, isn't he?
But what they're saying is that this is sparking Tory fury, that he's going against backbenchers and possibly even some ministers by this. So he, as to what you were saying earlier, that he's really putting his tanks on the lawn and standing for what he wants to bring in.
Yeah, the Conservative Party's split on it. Unquestionably,
he needs to. I think he's doing what he should do, which is to show leadership. If you're the Prime Minister and you're the leader of a party, at the end of the day, people need to get in line. Otherwise, you can't possibly. You can't run a party if you've got them. And the problem with the Tories is they're always split, and they're always infighting, and they're always destroying their own. And they're always destroying their own success. And I think that he needs to now show resolve and strength and determination, and this is his decision, and he should just stick to it, stick to his knitting.
sort of speed into that brick wall.
Yeah, well,
being described as an election gamble, but he was very certain to say that this is not about politics.
Oh, well, that was a hoot. You saw his nose grow by about 2 feet when he said this is not about politics, because of course it is. Like, the date he is interested in is not 2030, 2035 or 2050, it's 2024. It's next year when he has to have a general election, and he is gambling by shoring up some of his core support with this, that he will do better in the polls. That's what it's about. He'll let the planet burn if he gets him another spell in number 10.
The planet won't burn if we don't reach net zero, because we produce just under 1% of the world's global emissions.
Yeah, because we outsourced so much of ours to China.
But the net zero deadline hasn't changed.
No.
No, but he can't say how he'll get there now, because he was asked by a reporter at the press conference, if you're not going to get rid of these emissions because you're changing your dates on boilers and on cars, how are you going to do it? And he didn't have an answer. Because, of course, he hasn't got... I mean, he's just done this on the back of an envelope, hasn't he? That's it.
I think he's probably spent a little bit more time on it than that, Kevin.
I don't think you've got any evidence for that, have you? Come on.
Let's take a look at some of the other papers. The Telegraph is just coming in, so you might not have that there, but they're talking about, as was the mainstay of that speech, trying to save the public from the pain in their pockets.
You could actually... Sunak denies public net zero gain. You could approach it completely differently here, and this is where the split is. But most of the papers who are backing him on this were also the ones who backed Liz Truss and that budget. So, you know.
And your paper, Sarah, suggesting that this could transform Conservative fortunes.
Yes, the Sun, which is somewhere in the pile, is claiming that it's their campaign. Sun campaign victory, it says very firmly. But the Mail has been very sceptical of all of these measures, and so I think we feel that this is quite a good solution.
But pitching it as a battle, PM takes on eco-zealots in bold move.
Yes. Well, Zach Goldsmith is very cross.
Oh, yes.
And he's threatening to vote Labour, which I'm sure will make a big difference.
He can't, because he's a peer. You don't get a vote in a general election as a peer. You can vote in council elections, I think.
But, you know, that's the problem with... I mean, the word pragmatic has been used a lot. And you know, the thing is about politics is you have to be pragmatic, because you can't please all of the people all the time. You just have to do what you think is right. And if he is doing what he thinks is right, then... You know, either people will either like it or they won't, and that's totally their prerogative.
He shredded all the government reports that said actually this will be a gain. He has, because he's denied the evidence. Now the Sun have got him, and they claim a victory, which is fair enough. They got him filling up the car. That car, I think, is the one in Sainsbury's he had to borrow from a member of staff, so it was smaller than his own, and then he couldn't pay for the fuel because he didn't know how you could tap a card on a reader. I mean, I do think
it's pictured in the Sun.
He's pretty clueless on all this. He's never really believed in the environment, despite the fact he's got a rather nice bit of North Yorkshire as his constituency.
How's he going to deal with the business backlash? The FT is looking at that point, and we've heard tonight from Ford not happy.
Ford apparently are not happy, but I suspect that, I mean, it's a 5-year delay. I mean, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's quite a short period of time.
Yeah, but they plan sort of 10 years in advance, don't
they? Because you've got to re-equip all your lines. I think there are some Tories, and I wonder if he is one of these, because he was an investment banker, he was a casino capitalist, he would spin the wheel and try and make lots of money, but he's not in industry.
No.
And industry will be hit because car companies do, as you say, have to plan far in advance. And as the boss of Ford said, he wanted the government to have ambition, commitment and consistency. A relaxation of 2030 would undermine all three. The British car industry is incredibly important. It's under pressure because of Brexit. And I think changing like this so quickly... It's a dilemma now for Starmer, because if he says, right, well, if we win this time next year, we'll revert to 2030, then...
Which is what they are saying.
Yeah, then car companies are going to be in a problem, because what do they do in the meantime? Because they're going to make investment decisions
but I suppose it's
that are billions of pounds, including public money.
I suppose the question in his head would be, do I help people or do I help companies? Do I help big manufacturers or do I help voters who are struggling with their money? So he's made that decision as opposed to the other decision.
But you know what would help people struggling with their money is certainly raising pensions by the triple lock. It will also be by increasing benefits in April by at least inflation.
We're
Because how many people are going to be
we're getting into another argument
but he says I'm going to help you here.
And we have to go to the break.
As you say, it's not until 2030 anyway, and it's about buying a car.
Ignoring me.
No, I'm just giving
Kevin
context.
and Sarah, thank you very much for the minute. We are going to the break coming up. Our press preview colleague Susie Boniface has an exclusive on nuclear test veterans' fight to get their missing medical records back. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Do stay with us.
Well, it's kind of a way to fundraise for our charity, and we thought it was a really creative way to fundraise. And basically, we've got 60 of the world's best playwrights who have annotated scripts, first edition scripts, and they've put in their thoughts, their feelings, their memories, and it's really, really exciting. They've gone back to them and written them especially, so they've taken a couple of hours of their time and they've sort of thought about why they wrote the script, what special lines meant to them, what their favourite lines are. So it's really interesting, and we were reading through them, and some of them are quite moving, and some of them are really funny. And well, Jez Butterworth's annotated script of Jerusalem was one of my favourites because he not only annotated it, but he stuck in some props from the original production. So you've got like fake money in there and some fake cocaine in there and some lighter that Mark Rylance used. So it's really interesting. So that was one of my favourites. It's a piece of history. It's never been done before. So people who are into theatre or just anyone who likes those films or those plays, it's like having a piece of history in your living room.
So tell us about the work. Where will the proceeds of this auction go to?
They go to Good Chance Theatre. We're a theatre company who work with refugee artists, and we were founded in 2015 in the Calais Jungle Refugee and Migrant Camp.
And where are you based now?
We're based in London, but we work all over the world with artists from all over the world.
Fantastic. And when's the auction?
It's happening right now, so you could bid on it right now. And it finishes on the 6th of October.
Welcome back. You are still watching the press preview. Still with me, Kevin McGuire and Sarah Vine. Let's take a quick look at this story on the front of the Mirror. And it's exclusive by Susie Boniface. Newt's Test veterans are launching a last-ditch court battle to end a 70-year MOD cover-up. Kevin, take us into this story.
Yeah, my colleague Susie's very tenacious on this, some would say obsessed. But it is the fact that test veterans, nuclear test veterans, 50s and 60s used as guinea pigs for Explosion Britain's programme. They and their Australian counterparts, and also what were called in official papers natives, Aboriginal peoples are going to take legal action to get access to medical records. We were told there weren't any blood test records, but some have emerged from the atomic weapons establishment. So they're now having to crowdfund to get the money to take the MOD to court. They shouldn't have to do this. You shouldn't be fighting this battle. But they've been denied compensation because they were told there was no evidence linking what happened to them, to face nuclear explosions and terrible illnesses, and including in kids and grandkids down the line.
And Sarah, had it not been for the tenacity of Susie Boniface, that this story might not be seeing the light of day. She has really been.
She has really been, and I think it's a really important story. I think how old are these veterans now? They're quite old, aren't they?
Because it was the 50s and 60s. There were, I think it was 22,000 of them at the time. Their ranks are thinned every year, and it's appalling. They haven't had the truth. And certainly not getting justice.
They deserve it.
Let's move to the, which paper is it in? The Metro and the Royals' visit to France. Their three-day state visit, which started today. Lovely photo of all four there. And I'm not sure if they're probably still dining, or they're at the Palace of Versailles.
The menu, I have to say, the menu looked quite dyspeptic. I hope King Charles has got his Rennies. There was quite a lot of
I don't know what was in the menu. Oh.
It was
blue
lobster and
blue
crab,
lobster?
blue lobster and crab, and then the second course was chicken marinated in champagne, obviously.
Isn't he a greedy, messy eater?
He's quite a fussy eater. Yeah, he's quite a fussy eater.
Call it fussy, I'll call it greedy.
But yes, it's a proper state banquet, and then there's a lot of cheese, and then there's
there's a lot of cheese.
There's a pudding that apparently Lady Macron. Lady Macron? Is she Lady Macron? Have I just made that up?
I think you've made that up.
I think that she looks like Mrs. Macron had requested. I like the way they've coordinated their outfits there.
Yes, they do.
Crowds were a bit thin, weren't they?
What would you
midweek,
expect?
it's the first day.
Yeah, they haven't got the pulling power of his mum.
No.
Queen Elizabeth.
Well, it is a different time. And Macron did famously say at the passing of Queen Elizabeth II that there is only one queen. She was the queen, so it's a different
It was snubbed to Camilla, that wasn't it? But,
We've got a good picture on the front of the Daily Mail of her looking quite sort of Beyonce, with her hair flying off.
In the wind, we have
It's very windy. It was very windy at the reception, and all of the guests arrived and were very wind blown.
Sarah and Kevin, thank you so much. We are going to take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the low-pressure system bringing wet and windy conditions will move away by the weekend, only to be replaced by another on Saturday night. Heavy rain in the southeast will clear before the dawn to leave a mostly dry and bright start to the day for central and eastern parts. There'll be a few showers in the west and some more persistent rain in the far northwest. Showers will become more widespread through the day. Easing winds will allow the showers to become heavy and slow-moving, delivering some significant downpours in places.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.